Welcome to the first ever provider-focused portion of a national meeting for One Medical. And thank you all for being here and grabbing your seats. We want to kick off today with a very special message, keynote sort of presentation from a good friend and colleague who has been with One Medical Group since 2010, having started at the Noe Valley office and then moving to Spear and then moving to Vermont, where we are probably eventually going to open an office, but where he is currently leading our clinical learning team and doing an amazing job at it. But let me hand it over now to Spencer Blackman, who is somewhere. Okay.
Hey, everybody. Good to see everyone here. Let's give a quick round of applause to the events team and Tom and Christine and everybody else for, I think, already making this a success. And thanks to Andrew and Ron and Leah and all of you guys for giving me this opportunity to be here and talk to you guys today. I'm super psyched. And I thought, while we're here in Las Vegas, where people come from literally all over the world to gamble, I thought, let's talk about uncertainty in medicine, right? And the risks that we face every day with our patients. I think this is one of the biggest challenges we actually face in primary care, right? More so than a lot of other specialties and areas. And it's actually an area where I think if we can really embrace this and master it, we can differentiate ourselves truly, even more so from the rest of the healthcare system and really show ourselves as the leaders in improving healthcare across the nation and the world. So let's take a little time to get into this together. Now, those of you who know me know I'm not the biggest traditionalist in the world, but I do like to start off with a case, okay? So imagine that you're in your office, and if you're a virtual provider or a FLEB, just use your imagination, and a patient comes in complaining of abdominal pain, right? He's a 38-year-old guy. He's generally pretty healthy, but he's been having about a month of this kind of vague lower abdominal, pretty mild abdominal pain, but it's been there. And he's a little freaked out because his dad died of colon cancer when his dad was 58. And he's got young kids, so he's just, a little scared about all of this. And, he's been doing okay otherwise. He's had some constipation with it, but really no weird, worrisome things like blood in his stool or anything like that. And so you do your exam, check him out, and it checks out pretty well. He's got maybe a little tenderness in the left lower quadrant. Yeah, I'm really sure if there's a mass there or something. And so you send him home with a stool occult card, and that comes back negative. So now what? Let's do a show of hands. Raise your hand if you would generally reassure him. You'd say like, hey, I think this is probably nothing. I'm going to be okay. Give him some parameters. Come on back if it gets worse. How many of you guys would do that with a case like this? Okay, great. You can put your hands down. The alternative is to investigate, right? Refer him out to a gastroenterologist, tell him, let's just be sure that nothing's going on that's serious, probably get a colonoscopy. Raise your hand if you would do that. Okay, great. So a lot of us picked reassurance, which is totally reasonable, so let's explore that for a minute. So, you send him off home saying, I think there's probably nothing, we'll just see how you do. And he ends up coming back, not in 3 weeks or so, like you discussed, but more like 3 or 4 months. And he's saying he's been super busy with kids and family. But when he thinks about it, the pain is still there, maybe gotten a little worse. He's saying he's just been feeling a lot more tired. He's endorsing lower appetite, maybe even some weight loss. So this is scary. So you do go ahead and refer him off to a gastroenterologist. And a few days later, the report comes back, and he's got an 8 by 5 centimeter mass. And on biopsy, that is reported as adenocarcinoma. So he gets referred off to oncology for staging and further care. And this is a horrible case. I mean, really rare. It's really unlikely for a young guy like this to end up with colon cancer. But I bet if you were somebody who reassured him at this point, you'd probably be questioning yourself and thinking, oh gosh, I wish I had maybe sent him off for further evaluation sooner. So, okay, let's think about that for a minute. Let's say it's a similar case, right? But for some reason, you feel more concerned. A lot of us did. And you decide to refer him off, right? And you say, hey, let's just be sure nothing's going on. So he goes off, sees the gastroenterologist, of course gets the colonoscopy, and the report comes back from that. And it's a little bit of diverticular disease, otherwise totally clear. Great. but he has a complication. He has a perforation of his colon due to the instrumentation, which is also really rare, but these do happen. And he ends up getting all the sequelae of that, so he gets peritonitis, and he has to have surgeries, and he's in the hospital, and it's just, terrible stuff, horrible stuff also. And you think, oh, gosh, if only I had maybe just waited and reassured him. Oh, but wait, that didn't go so well either. So now you're kind of wondering, well, what do I do if a patient like this comes in, right? If I reassure him, maybe I'm going to miss a cancer, but if I refer him and I'm wrong, then maybe he's going to get harmed by unnecessary care. You've really just kind of wandered into a big pool of uncertainty, and it's the kind of thing we deal with every day. But I'm here to wander into that pool with you guys, explore it a little bit, and see if we can sort of do better with how we manage this kind of uncertainty. Now let's go back to the patient for a second. Some of you guys might be saying, I don't really need to deal with uncertainty. What I need is better scientific tools to help me know what to do. And if that's you, then this might be something you're interested in. It's a handheld scanner that can actually detect physiologic activity from outside of the body and give us information about what's happening on some of the organs inside. And it's actually pretty good at determining if somebody has cancer and a number of other diseases. In fact, you can see it here in action. Okay, so maybe you want, a little bit more of a terrestrial version of certainty, okay? So here's one of those. It's a cancer center. Now, when I was in my first job after residency, it wasn't at One Medical, but early on, I passed by a cancer center like this on the side of the road. And I had this epiphany. I was like, whoa, every patient that walks through those doors has cancer. There's like no question whether they have cancer or not. They just have cancer. And it just struck me. I was like, there's so much of energy we put in, I think back then for me and still, and probably for all of us in this room, that we put into wondering, like, does this patient have cancer? Do they have a brain tumor? What's going on with them? It's a lot of worry. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of money. And so, if you want certainty, there are options like that. You could work in a cancer center. You could work in a trauma center. You can do Botox injections all day. I mean, there are options. But for those of us in primary care, we are where patients come when there's uncertainty. They come to us with uncertainty about what's going on in their body, what's going on with their symptoms, what's the best course of action for their condition. Stuff like, should they stay in their job? Should they stay with their spouse? How to raise their kids, right? This is really heavy stuff. But, I actually see it as a pretty incredible gift. This is Bernard Lown. He is a professor emeritus at Harvard of cardiology. He invented the DC defibrillator. He is really credited with paving the way for our modern coronary care units and all the care that happens there. And he is, in my opinion, one of the great humanists in medicine and a master of the art of medicine. And he wrote this awesome book that I highly recommend called The Lost Art of Healing. And in it, he says that he feels extraordinary privilege to be a physician, care provider. A doctor has a front row seat for an unmatched theatrical performance, a sweeping panorama of events that mirror the social and cultural history of an era. And I agree. And I also would add that if we try and avoid uncertainty, we end up missing a lot of what he's talking about. So today, I want us to try and dive deeper into uncertainty and change how we feel about it from this kind of feeling to this. Now that feels a lot better to me. So before we do that, though, I want to dive into what might be the 300-pound gorilla in the room, evidence-based medicine, right? Evidence-based medicine, isn't this supposed to be the answer? Wasn't this supposed to, help us all know exactly what to do and kind of lead us to this beautiful land of all the right answers, right? Well, it hasn't done that. It's actually failed so far to fundamentally transform medicine as it was initially hoped. Now, why is that? So I care about evidence-based medicine as much as anybody, and I actually think it's critical that at One Medical we practice evidence-based medicine. But I think we need to understand what that means. What is evidence-based medicine? So let's get into that a little bit. Raise your hand, another show of hands, let's see a good one, if you know what a Cochrane Review is, or the Cochrane Library is. Great. Keep your hands up if you think it's a really good resource for evidence-based medicine information. Oh, saw a couple hands go down. Okay, now you can put your hands down. So there was a study last year in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology that looked at every review in the Cochrane database, almost 1,400. And they were looking for reviews that gave us certainty, that kind of gave us the ability to know what to do. And they were looking really for where the review was positive to the intervention being studied and the results were significant. They found 25 out of 1,400 where that was the case. So in all the other cases, either there just wasn't enough evidence to know, or the evidence that we had said that just it didn't work. So there's just so much that we don't know in medicine. Well, why is that? Well, a lot of the research that's done is actually flawed, unfortunately. The randomized controlled trial, which is considered broadly kind of the gold standard of research, actually suffers from a lot of factors. So, there's flawed study design, there's underpowered studies, overpowered studies. It's really hard often to translate the results from a study, which is a very selected population, to the patient in front of us or other populations. And a lot of studies don't even look across various ethnic or racial groups, and they're really hard to translate. On top of that, there is a well-known bias to publishing positive findings and kind of ignoring studies that don't find something. So if a study finds that something doesn't work, it often doesn't get the light of day, and that means the stuff that we do know is kind of out of whack and it's not a complete picture. And most concerning is the role and influence of industry and special interests in this research. So many of these studies are either conducted by or paid for by these companies, and that invites bias. Now, just in the mid-2000s, when we were kind of going all in on evidence-based medicine, this guy, who I want everyone to know about, named John Ioannidis, who is an epidemiologist at Stanford, published a paper that became the most read publication of our times, over 2 million views. And it's called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. And there's a lot of math actually in the paper that backs up his assertion. I've met him, and he is a really thoughtful, reasonable, an intelligent guy. And he thinks that evidence-based medicine is fantastic. It's a great idea, but it just doesn't exist today. In one eye-opening example, his team looked for bias from pharmaceutical industry in all the meta-analyses that looked at trials for antidepressants. And they found that 29% of the papers that were meta-analyses of these trials were written by authors who were employees of the pharmaceutical industry that made the drug that was being studied. And another 50% had direct ties, like people on the authors were on the boards of these companies or received money from those companies. So almost 80% of these papers had industry bias in them. It's that pervasive. This is really important. The pharmaceutical industry is worth $450 billion in this country, and it's worth over $1 trillion worldwide. And they spend millions upon millions of dollars, not just conducting the research, but trying to get clinicians just like you and me to believe the results, prescribe the drugs, use the devices, et cetera, order those tests. Here's another example that's like literally closer to home. This is a supplement to the Journal of Family Practice. Does anyone subscribe to this journal? Did anyone get this supplement? So this came to my door, and I opened it up, and I thought, oh, this is cool. It's like updated reviews on things like cardiovascular risk, the microbiome, diabetes, sublingual immunotherapy, like cool stuff. But then I noticed something highlighted there. There was free CME in this, and I get a little skeptical when I see free CME because there's always, not always, but often somebody who's kind of like behind the scenes paying for this and wanting to get this information out. So I got a little skeptical, and I decided to do my own Ioannidis type analysis. So I went to this website, which is called Dollars for Docs. And it's a service created by the journalistic watchdog group ProPublica. And you can put any clinician or researcher's name in there, and it'll show you how much money they've received from industry over the past 3 years. It's pretty cool. So I grabbed the first article in this supplement, first author. His name is Neil Skolnick. I looked him up. He's an associate professor of family practice, actually residency director of family practice at a hospital outside of Philly. And I took his name, and I plugged it right into the website. All right? Let's see what happens, okay? So, boom, right out of the bat, $160,000 is how much he'd received over a 3-year period from industry. I was like, whoa, a windfall. I mean, like, first name. So now I'm interested. I'm like, okay, I'll do another name. So Javid Butler, he's the chief of cardiology at Stony Brook University, wrote this article. I'm like, all right, Javid Butler, you're going in. Let's see what happens. Boom! $225,000. So now I'm just like, okay, I'm doubling down here. Like, I'm going to push my luck. And so I go for Stephen Brunton, and he's the editor of this supplement. He's the vice chair of the Primary Care Education Consortium, something or other. Plunk him in. I'm like, come on, Stephen Brunton. Come on, Stephen Brunton. Daddy needs a new stethoscope. Come on. $400,000. I mean, like, holy shit, right? Like, these are just 3 names that I picked out of this thing that showed up at my door. And it just reflects how pervasive this industry is in our education, research, all of the stuff that we do every day. Now, look, not everybody takes money from pharmaceutical industries. There's a lot of good research or people are trying to do out there. As I said, I think there is some good evidence out there. But the reality is, these industries prey on our deep-seated longing for certainty and desire for evidence, especially in our moments of doubt. I mean, for me, and I think this is probably true for a lot of you guys, how relieved do you feel like if you have a question and you find a study or a guideline that kind of gives you an answer, right? There's a power there. That power influences what we do every day and the care that our patients received. And in Ioannidis' view, and in mine, in a large part, that power has been hijacked. Now, this is kind of scary. I understand. Like, hearing that so much of what we do, what we're taught to do, the stuff that we think we're really doing in the best interest of our patients is either based on incomplete data or information that might even be deliberately misleading. But you know what? I'm not scared. And I don't think you guys need to be scared. I think that we can lean into this and really learn how to use uncertainty for the better, for us and for our patients. And so that's what we're going to do with the rest of our time. We're going to talk about that. So let's talk about risk, okay? Something we deal with all the time, right? Now, outside of medicine, risk refers to simply the probability of some unknown future event happening. That's it, right? There's even some positive connotations with risk, right? Like, take a risk, or no risk, no reward. But in medicine, risk is seen as a threat, right? It's something that we have to deal with medical care, right? And we're bombarded with this all the time, these studies about, oh, this raises risk, this lowers risk, right? But in actuality, I think a lot of that is just noise, and we can actually ignore it, and I'll show you in a good example. This is a meta-analysis that came out last year that showed that, or concluded that, the relative risk of developing a hip fracture, if you take a PPI, if you're an older woman, is 1.26. Right? So you might read this in the paper or in like New York Times or something, right? Like, PPIs increase risk by 26%. I mean, who would take a PPI if that were the case, right? Increased risk of fracture. You wouldn't want to do that. But is this really meaningful in and of itself? It's actually not. You have to know what is the baseline risk to begin with, right? So if hip fractures were super rare, like say 1 in a million, and then you took a PPI, your risk would go up to, and I'm sorry, it's not as highlighted as it could be, but it'd go up to about 1 in 800,000. That's not that concerning, right? Most people probably wouldn't even blink an eye at that. They'd probably take the medicine. Let's look at the real numbers for a second so we can get a sense of it. The baseline risk in actuality of an older woman having a hip fracture is about 1 in 1,000. So still pretty rare, but definitely more common. And if you take a PPI and you do the math, this means that now that risk goes to about 1 in 800. So, maybe a little more meaningful, maybe something worth weighing. And, you probably would do something like this with your patients. One of these shared decision tools, you'd show them, like, here's your risk without the medicine, here's your risk with. And then you weigh it versus what, benefit they might be getting. And maybe if they were actually getting some relief from the medicine or preventing a GI bleed or something, that might make sense. But that's really up to you guys to decide, right? You and your patients to decide. But to put that in context, does anyone know what the relative risk is for smoking and lung cancer? It's not 1.5, it's not 2 or 3, it's 30, right? That means it increases your risk by 3,000%. I mean, these are the kinds of risks that matter. These are the kinds of risks we should be really thinking about and focusing on with our patients. Here's one last person I'd like you guys to know about. His name is Gilbert Welch. He's a really eminent epidemiologist and family practice physician at Dartmouth, and he wrote one of my favorite books, Overdiagnosed. I think we did a book club on this years ago in San Francisco. And he says that we've already kind of identified all these big smoking gun risk factors. We kind of know about them. And what's happening now is epidemiologists are really evaluating these big data sets, right? We have big data. But we're just powering these studies to find these really kind of tiny, meaningless results. And he says that unless a factor doubles your risk or more, so that's a relative risk of 2 or increased risk of 100% or more, we should just ignore it. And if we do that, that's going to cut out a lot of noise for us and our patients. Now here's another powerful insight about risk, right? We're always balancing harms and benefits. You know, you take this, what's going to happen? It's going to benefit you, it's going to harm you. But when you're doing that, one way you can help clear up kind of how to go forward is to be in the now. So what that means to me is, if someone, say, is taking an aspirin or a statin to reduce their future risk of a cardiovascular event, that may be great, right? Especially if they're high risk, that may be really sensible. But if they were having a side effect of that, like, you know, muscle aches from the statin or nosebleeds from the aspirin or something, and they didn't want to take the drug anymore, I think that would be totally the right thing to do, right? Because the harms they're experiencing now definitely outweigh this possible benefit that they might be trying to get in the future. And if I were that person's clinician, I'd be totally confident, yeah, we're doing the right thing, let's go ahead and stop it. You can even switch harms and benefits. Like if a woman is taking hormones to improve her menopause symptoms, for example, and she's getting a real benefit, then that's great. She can feel really good about the fact that she's doing that treatment now and getting a benefit and not really worry too much about those possible harms in the future, right? Some increased rates of things like heart attacks or blood clots, et cetera. So let's remember, when it comes to risk, right, not all risk is a threat. We don't have to deal with every risk. And you often end up chasing these average risks, trying to lower them and causing more problems than helping. Focus on the risks that matter. So this means, you know, look for things where they at least double the risk. And actually a lot of epidemiologists say even 3 or 4 times the risk is really something that's truly meaningful for us and our patients. And then when you're weighing harms and benefits, if there's something happening now versus something in the future, it's very often that what is happening now is what really matters, and you can let that outweigh. And I think applying these concepts can actually be really freeing for us and our patients when we're kind of navigating these risks. Now, we're still going to have some uncertainty there, right? We still got to make decisions about what to do. We got to have all these other things going on with our patients. And you know what? I actually don't think uncertainty is that bad. And I think you guys are dealing with this really well already, right? If a patient comes in as a 28-year-old with chest pain, are you totally certain that they're not having a heart attack and it's probably anxiety? No. But you navigate what William Osler calls the art of probability. And we do it all the time. It's when we kind of reach the edges of our comfort zone, or maybe we remember like a bad outcome that happened to an old patient, a previous patient. That's when we get really looking for certainty. And you know what? Sometimes certainty is important, right? Like if a 65-year-old woman calls us on the phone and says, you know, and she's got like diabetes and high blood pressure and all that, and she says, I'm having crushing substernal chest pain and I can't breathe, we should call 911, get her to a hospital. If it turns out to be reflux, fantastic, right? That's great, but we did the right thing. But in less dramatic situations, some uncertainty is okay, right? Might even be good. Because takes a patient, for example, who has sort of like unknown, you know, GI symptoms or some headache or something like that, right? After we evaluate them, even if we're still uncertain what's going on, we can say to them, look, you don't have cancer. You don't have inflammatory bowel disease or lupus, right? We can be sure that they don't have these things, and then say, even though we don't know what's going on, that's actually better than having one of these really bad diagnoses. And then we can focus on helping them cope with the actual symptoms, even without knowing what's going on. And if you think about it, so many of our patients have room for improvement in things that we know will benefit them and improve their lives. Things like exercise, diet, relationships, sleep, stress, right? These things, we can intervene, help our patients with them. They're probably going to get healthier and feel better, and it's not going to come with the risk of unnecessary treatments or drugs or tests or anything like that. The truth is, we really just don't know so much of the time what's going on with our patients. What's the cause of their symptoms? What's the best treatment for them, et cetera. But admitting this uncertainty actually forms the starting point of a more open conversation and a deeper relationship with our patients. For example, let's say somebody with chest pain. We can say to them, you know, Mrs. Jones, I'm not totally sure what's going on, but I am worried that your symptoms might be to your heart not getting enough blood, which is an emergency. So I think the best thing for you to do is to go to an emergency room and get checked out and get monitored. And if it's nothing, fine, we'll be reassured. But with what I'm hearing and seeing right now, I'm just not sure. Or for that patient who had the abdominal pain that we talked about earlier, we can say to him, look, I can't be sure what's going on today, but you know, your symptoms don't really point strongly to colon cancer right now, and you're actually a lot younger than your dad was. I understand the concern, but why don't we do this? Why don't we just check back with each other in a few weeks, and we'll see. And you know what? If it's something serious, it'll probably get worse. And if it's getting better, then we'll be reassured. That kind of language actually makes it more likely that he'll return. Because if we're just certain that he's fine and reassure him, then he might ignore some worrisome symptoms. Or worse, he might even just feel embarrassed to come back because we already told him he was fine. Talking about our uncertainty actually honors the relationships that we have and are trying to build with our patients, and it doesn't undermine them. And then we can leverage those relationships, right? This, to me, is the true power of being a primary care clinician. Because you can tell your patients, right, these are exactly what we're talking about. You can tell your patients, once you get to know them and build this trust, that, you know what, I've seen patients have similar symptoms. I didn't know what it was, but you know what, they got better. And patients will trust you, and many of them will get better. And even more powerfully, you can just let your patients know that you are there to care for them, right? Just saying something like, you know what, you're going to be okay, or we're going to take good care of you no matter what, makes a huge, huge difference. And again, I believe this kind of language further bonds us with our patients, and that actually lets them know that we truly care about them, and that helps them actually get better. It's really, really important to think that way, in my opinion. Okay, so now here's one of the great things about working at One Medical. We know that medicine is uncertain, and so we reflect this in so many ways of how we work. For example, we're a big team. We work as a team, which is awesome, and we honor the decisions that our team members make and our colleagues make, especially within the context of the primary care relationship, but even outside of that, the PCP-patient relationship. Now, how does this look in practice? Well, we don't really knock or undermine something one of our colleagues may have done, because we know that there isn't always one right thing, one right solution, and that even exceptional clinicians can make mistakes. So rather than undermining the trust that patients have developed in us as a team, we support that trust, but we still try and do what we think is the right thing in the moment. And we take that sense of respect and teamwork even further because we will share feedback with each other. Now, this doesn't happen in so many other groups, but we try and do it here. And that is one of the things that I think is going to make us even better and better as we grow. Because it's important, when we know that our colleagues will benefit from hearing some feedback, we are willing to share it with them. It's incredible. Now, behind the scenes, we're working diligently to help all of you guys on the clinical teams better engage with our patients around uncertainty. One area I want to talk about, which I think is really exciting, is how we think about quality measures. Now, a lot of other organizations and payers and institutions and systems have defined quality in primary care around things like mammography rates or A1C targets, right? But we're working to remain decidedly uncertain about how to measure quality in primary care until we can clearly define it and then create metrics that truly reflect what matters to us as clinicians, our patients, and the system as a whole. I think that's awesome because it really reflects our belief that none of us should have to do anything that doesn't reflect the values and the goals that we've set up with our patients around their care. And finally, when uncertainty arises in day-to-day practice, which it does, we're working on systems to try and help us all get some quick, helpful input. I love the conversations that I see every day in our HIP chat rooms and the fact that any one of us can reach out to literally hundreds of thoughtful, intelligent colleagues and benefit from our collective wisdom. And I look forward to more and more systems that help us more easily access really great knowledge and clinical decision-making tools that are based on the best available unbiased evidence. Now, here's the mind-blowing part about all of this. When you take all of that and blend it in with our philosophy of care, which you guys are going to learn about next, but things like getting to know our patients, building strong relationships with them, helping them identify their goals and values around their health, well, then you get this, which is what David Sackett and the other pioneers of evidence-based medicine actually intended from the beginning. It's called the evidence-based medicine triad, and it reflects the balanced integration of individual clinical expertise that you guys all have, the best available evidence, and the patient's values and expectations. And this is what evidence-based medicine can and will be like at One Medical. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with another case. This one comes from David Polaner. He is a pediatric intensivist an anesthesiologist at the University of Colorado. And it's the story of a 2-year-old girl that was admitted to the pediatric ICU there. She had respiratory failure. She had been in the hospital for a week. She was getting worse. She had kind of maximal interventions. She was intubated, all the wires, all the tubes. She was even on a high-frequency oscillator, which is like this last-ditch effort to try and get more oxygen into her body. And she was still showing signs of her organs not getting enough oxygen. And her team was actually talking about withdrawing care. The worst part about it was, this was her second admission for the same respiratory failure problem. She had barely survived it a few months previous at her last admission, and neither time can anyone actually figure out why she had this situation. So this girl was actually from a family who had recently emigrated from China. And they didn't speak much English. They had to use interpreters to communicate. And so Dr. Planner sat down with an interpreter and the girl's mom to tell her kind of what they were thinking of doing. And the mom asked, could I have a traditional Chinese healer come in and treat my daughter? Now, Dr. Planner wasn't really a believer in alternative medicine, but he also knew that the scientific, evidence-based care was failing. And it didn't really take a lot of insight to realize that they kind of had to do whatever they could to give the family the feeling like they had done everything they could for their daughter. So they said, sure. And the next day, the healer came in, put out all these things that he was planning on using, putting down the child's feeding tube. And even though the team couldn't really figure out what these things were and what they were expected to do, they still decided to go ahead with it because, again, they felt this duty to the family and to give them the chance to do everything that they could do for their daughter. So down went the treatments. And in a couple days, she got better. She got off the ventilator, and within a week, she was fully recovered and went home. Dr. Planner and his team had never seen anything like this. Now, I tell this story because it's a reminder that we can't ever be too certain about the rightness or wrongness of any treatment, right? And we have to stay open-minded. We have to listen carefully when our patients and their families tell us what they need. Nobody knows for sure if the Chinese medicine actually helped this girl. We'll never know that. We can't know that. The only thing we can know is that she got better, and that's really the only thing that matters. Even if she had died, I think that the willingness of the team to try something different would have likely given her family some small amount of peace. And in actuality, it may have helped save her life. We just won't know. But when I think about this story, it opens up a sense of wonder. It's not so different than thinking about how incredible our brains are, or our kidneys, or our immune system, or the whole universe, right? It's so incredible. We only understand such a small fraction of it, and every time we learn something new, it opens up more questions, right? Everything just keeps getting more and more wondrous. Now, we all chose primary care and medicine because we love the wonder and the mystery of human life. Yes, we are under constant pressure to provide answers. And yes, we're always being lured by certainty, presented to us from all these forces around us. But remember, we're One Medical. We can be different. We can be masterful clinicians while remaining joyfully, compassionately, and confidently uncertain. And we and our patients will be better for it. At least I think so. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the time. Here you go.
That was great.
Thank you. Thank you,
sir. Thank you, Spencer. That was fantastic.